And I'm going to turn on my mic so I don't have to talk as loud. Let's see, so you can hear me drink. So this talk is sort of the prequel to the talk that I gave an hour and a half ago. I wanted to do this one first. I didn't tell the organizers at all, so it's my fault that this one should have come first. But it's okay. It's fine. Any questions in the back? Was that a question? Or the volume is not good? Oh, because of the door. Okay. Stop touching the door, people. All right, so this talk is meant for an audience for people who are unfamiliar with using Google APIs. And so the main idea is to show you different ways that you can access our APIs using Python and JavaScript. You can also access our REST APIs in many other languages. It's not just Python and JavaScript, but this is sort of like a good way to capture sort of a large audience. And also we have developer tools that only work with Python and JavaScript so that you get access to those. All right? So that's really what we're going to go over today. So to start with, I love coming to Code Camp. I think I've only missed 2 in its history, so I'm very happy to be here. I want you all to be, I know you're all looking like this inside, okay, because you've just had ice cream. So I know how you feel, so you feel just like that, but indoors. Okay, so a little background about me. I'm a teacher. I either do private corporate training or I'm adjunct faculty at Foothill College, which is close by. Elaine's a full-timer, so she's a dedicated professor. I kind of show up every couple of years to do the intermediate Python class. I promised her I would do the advanced one at some point too. I just can't stop my travel schedules. That's the hard thing. But I also go to conferences and give talks, and I take vacation days and do private corporate training as well. The other thing about me is that if you know Python, I've written a couple of books, and I'm working on the 3rd edition of the blue one there, the main one actually. It's kind of tricky because there's a lot of new stuff in Python 3. So when I did a 3rd edition of the other book here, it was a lot easier because I only needed to show you Python 2 version and then the Python 3 version. But now in the language fundamentals book, I actually have to talk about why things changed in Python 3. So that's why it's taking me a little bit longer. But the most important thing about me is that I've been a software engineer for over 25 years. I was one of the original 10 engineers that built Yahoo Mail 20 years ago. I worked at a couple other jobs as well too, and then some of you came to my talk earlier where I explained the weirdest job I ever had was working on software for doctors to analyze patients with spinal fractures, so really just the one on the left, even though all 3 of these were actually Python applications. So that's probably the most bizarre job that I've ever had. But as I told the other crowd, that I asked them why they hired me, and they said, oh, it's a lot easier to find a programmer and teach them the medical stuff because I haven't even taken biology in high school, so I had no medical background at all. And they said, oh, it's a lot easier to find a developer and teach them the medical stuff than it is to get a medical person and teach them how to code. So that's kind of how I ended up getting that job, and that was after 9/11. So I wasn't really picky about what kind of job I had. I just had a mortgage to pay and young kids and stuff like that. So it was interesting for a while. But anyway, I'm at Google now, and I represent our cloud team. And so this talk is, a little bit more about me. This talk is all about me, right? So in case you want to learn some stuff, my job is to produce stuff to help reduce barriers to entry. So that if you are getting onboarded with some of our APIs, I focused on the G Suite ones for the last 5 years, so I have a lot of videos on it, but I'm going to talk to you about the cloud stuff as well today too. All right, so the main idea is that my job, the reason why I talk about me is because my job is to make you successful using all of our developer tools and APIs. That's my mission, okay? All right, so this talk is broken into 5 different sections. We're going to have sort of an introduction. Then I'm going to get started with how to do Google APIs. How do you make a project? Because anytime you use a REST API, you have to create a project. And sometimes even when you don't use a REST API, a project is created on your behalf. So at some point, there's usually some project involved. And then I will talk about our cloud-based REST APIs. And then to kind of like review from the other session, I'm going to give sort of like a couple of slides from the serverless side, because that has a lot of stuff you're going to use, all right? It's, for those of you who are beginners and stuff, it may not be worthwhile for you to go and get servers to start up VMs to worry about operating systems. You really just want to write code and run it. So there's a few slides repeated from the last talk, but for some of you, it will be brand new. Okay, and then we will wrap up from there. Okay, so to start with, I want you to be successful. So hopefully money starts flowing in after you discover you really like doing this kind of stuff. Okay, money's good. Okay, so a lot of people are familiar with G Suite, which used to be called Google Apps. So this is our Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Docsheet, Slides, and Forms. That's great, but that's really just, that's only part of what Google offers. If you ask somebody, what else do you know Google for? They will say search and Android and YouTube and Chrome. So these are the main things that people know Google for. However, I will contend or argue with you that these things are just user tools. They are for consumers, and you're just a user. By being here at this conference, that means that you're more than just a user, you're a developer. So I want to be able to show you how to take advantage of the developer platforms and APIs we have to offer so that you can actually not just use these tools, but also integrate their technologies into your apps so that you don't have to invent the wheel from scratch again. Okay? So I always say there's more to Google than just the user tools. Okay, and that's why we have APIs. The APIs enable us to share our, all the effort that we put into those tools. We want to give you access to that technology, that power, and so that you can integrate that into your apps. We think that's really important. So that's why a lot of our stuff is open source as well. You'll find that our client libraries are all open source. You'll find that most of our code samples are open sourced. Even the code samples we have in our documentation is open sourced, right? So we want everybody to get online and write apps and be successful, because if you are successful, there's a good chance that one of your users will do some Google search and click on an ad and pay my salary. That's really what I'm after, right? Because that's most of my salary. I know there's a long tail to getting there. You're probably thinking those 41 cents that you just sent to Google or told that advertiser to send to Google, that's a long ways of paying my Silicon Valley salary and all of our salaries, but at some point it all adds up, right? Okay? So anyway, so the APIs can be used for you to write your next web app as well as your next mobile app, or more likely, if you want to be successful, you're going to do both, right? So that's kind of the important thing. But a lot of people say, oh my God, I can't use your APIs, they're too hard. OAuth is driving me crazy, I don't understand it. I'm just running into nothing but dead ends. The documentation doesn't help because it doesn't tell me what I need to know. I have to know what I'm looking for in order to search for it. So those things are frustrating. And also, yes, there's quick starts, but what about the next step? What do you gave me the 101, but what about the 102? Right? What do I do after that? There's a big gap between a fully working app that you wrote and the quick start that you saw on the docs. So can we do better than that? So that's part of my job, is to sort of do the 102 and the 103 to kind of lead you to the next step. But obviously, we have to get you started first. If you can't get started, then it doesn't matter how much you learn. Right? So that's why we're going to spend probably a good amount of time talking about OAuth. Not to make you all OAuth experts, but enough so that you know how Google APIs work. And by the way, the other thing that's kind of unfortunate is that other companies that provide APIs, they may do OAuth completely differently. Okay? And I actually find that Google's way of doing OAuth is actually the most complex way, but it's more secure. Okay? So, for example, I find the Twitter API pretty easy to use. Okay? But it's not as rigorous in its security as Google is. Okay? At least our APIs, I feel like you have to jump through more hoops. But it's because Google security is paranoid, because we always seem to get in the knees for some security breach or whatever, right? Or other companies get into the knees more for security breaches than we do, but anytime we do it, it's kind of like a black eye for our security team, and so they're always, always vigilant. So let's talk about getting started with API projects. And by the way, some of these screenshots were taken, not too long ago, but we're always trying to improve things for our users. So the user interface has probably changed just a little bit. And if it's significant, if the change is significant, I'll let you know. Okay? But the concept should still be the same, and they should all be there. All right. So before we get started, I just wanted to say something about security, because it's very easy for people to get confused between these two terms, authentication and authorization. A lot of people use these words interchangeably, and sometimes the functionality is kind of intertwined with each other so that it's harder to tell the difference between the two. All right, but the main idea is authentication, or auth-n, is you are who you say you are. And typically this is done with login and password. Supposedly you're the only one with your password, right? Except for when you share your password. So sometimes you need something more, like you need fingerprints or you need a retina scan. Okay, so at a Google data center, there are certain places where you do need a fingerprint scan, and sometimes in a very secure environment, you do need a retina scan. Okay, pretty scary actually when you see that stuff. So that's you are who you say you are. The other one, authorization or auth-z, is okay, let's say you passed the authentication part, but do you have access to this data? So authorization is always about third-party data access. Okay, and so OAuth 2 is the current standard that we use for authorization, but there's a little bit of authentication in there too, because usually you have to sign into Google before you can click on the OAuth OK button, right? So sometimes it kind of one forces the other. And so in other words, users have to give your app permission to access their data. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this multiple times. I'm going to say this multiple times in this session until it totally sinks into your brain. Okay, users must give your code access to their data because it is their private personal data. All right. Most of the time, when people just say auth, they're really talking about auth-z. But you know, on occasion, it's auth-n, and then probably the most common is you really mean both. All right, so there's a developer's console. If you are going to use Google APIs, it's probably easier for you to go to console.developers.google.com. If you're mostly developing using Google Cloud Platform, and you may use APIs from time to time, then you would go to cloud.developers.google.com or cloud.console or console.cloud.google.com or something. Okay, they both end up going to the same place. These developer consoles are all sort of like merged together, but they're sort of like at different parts. So these are just two different entry points to get to the same thing. You're just going into one side of the room or side of the house versus the other side of the house. That's all it is. Okay, and somewhere on this page, okay, when you jump to the API side or this one, there is going to be like a link to create a project or select a project where you can choose an existing project that you have or you create a new one. I think it may be a plus sign now instead of create a project. It may be a plus sign. Okay. So you need to create a project, and then you need to sort of turn on all the APIs that you want to use or you think you may want to use. Just because you turn them on doesn't mean you have to use them. But if you don't turn it on, then you can't use them. Okay? And because it assumes that you're going to be developing on our cloud platform, it automatically turns on a bunch of them from the cloud side. But it's okay. You can turn them off if you don't choose to use them. There's no harm to your existing project. Okay? And so what happens is you also have a dashboard. The dashboard is very useful because it will not only let you enable an API, but it also gives you stuff that you would have to build on your own anyway if you were writing an app. Like, don't you want to see how much traffic your app is getting? Don't you want to see how many errors are related to requests that you've gotten from users? Don't you just want to see how fast you're responding to your users? So these things are things that you would have to build for your own apps anyway. Instead, you get them for free here if you choose to use Google APIs. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then on the bottom section, it'll give you a list of all the APIs you've turned on, and then it'll tell you how busy they are, how much they're used in your apps. And of course, you can disable them if you choose not to use them. Or you can click on Enable API or go to API Library or search for a new API to turn on. Okay, so that's the dashboard page. The library page, we used to show like a big list like this, but the problem is Google has so many APIs that we've just like dropped all this and given you a search engine. Shockingly, some people think we're a search company. I don't know where they get that idea from, but anyway, you just search for the APIs that you want to use. Now, what makes it difficult is what if you don't know what API you want to use, right? You want to build a certain app for a certain set of users, but you don't know. So that's kind of like the tough thing. So hopefully we're adding more features to kind of help you figure out what APIs you do want to use. But generally the search engine, if you just type something like database, it'll show you all the database APIs, which may be helpful. Okay? So anyway, we used to do this grouping, which I think was kind of useful because you could see the cloud ones versus the maps ones versus the G Suite ones. But anyway, so that's the library. And then the most important thing is the credentials page. Okay, the credentials page shows you that there's two major sections to it, and we're going to talk about each one because they're different from each other. In one section, we will have the API keys section, and then the other section is called the OAuth 2 client ID section. All right, and they're different types of credentials. And when you need to make any one of these, you'll just click on the Create Credentials to do that. Okay, so this is where you make the credentials for the app that you're going to write. Okay. So when you click on Create Credentials, you're going to be asked what kind of credentials do you want. So you would choose API key, OAuth 2, or service account. So I'll talk about these one at a time. Okay, so the API key is just a string. It's a hex string that you can use for certain APIs. I will tell you which APIs require API keys and then which ones require OAuth. Okay. Generally, the OAuth ones are the ones that are more secure. So that's how you should think. Okay. When you see an API key, you're basically looking for something that's public data, not personal or private data. All right. So anyway, if you're going to create a new API key, it asks you what kind of key do you want. Okay. So server key, browser key, Android key, iOS key. What that really means is I'm developing a mobile app. I have something running in JavaScript on the client side in the browser, or everything else. Okay, that's what API keys are. You pick one, okay, you give it a name, and then if you want to whitelist, like I don't want anybody using this API key unless they come from these IP addresses, okay, so you can make it your API key secure in that way, and then you click Create. Once you click Create, you get this string, okay, that you can cut and paste and put into your app. Okay, now, with that said, that's not really secure. Because if this API key gets out, anybody can use it. Okay? And if anybody can use it, they can overuse your quota, and then your app will be disabled. All right? So you don't want to put this in a place that's easy to access. Of course, when you're just creating your app and you're testing it out, it's perfectly fine to just cut and paste this as a string in your source code. That's fine. But once you get into like production, you want to put this into some, kind of like you want to encrypt it, you want to put it into a key broker, or you want to put it into some secure place, not hard coding it into your source. All right, but that's the API key. The other kind of key you can create, No, API's key don't expire. But you can disable it. Okay, so that's a good question. He asked if API keys expire. API keys do not expire. Okay, but you can disable it and just make it not usable anymore. Okay. The other kind is OAuth 2 client ID. Okay, in OAuth 2 client ID, okay, so it depends. You can create different types of OAuth client IDs. It depends on where the apps are located. In other words, are you running on server side? Is it a web app? Is it installed somewhere? Like, is it on a mobile device, or is it on a desktop computer? Or, so service account is the other type of OAuth. So that one is where you are, machine to machine, basically. So if you have an application and you're talking to another API, but you're not a human user, you're actually working on behalf of a user. That's what a service account is for. Okay, it's to because the user is not there to opt in, right? So you have to sort of represent the user. So that's a service account. And then there's the client-side JavaScript apps, which basically run in the browser. Okay, and then you have other things which are limited input devices that don't really have, it's not really, quote, an intelligent device, but it still needs access. Okay, so those are the kind of OAuth credentials you can create. And if you want to read more about all 5 of these, then you can go to that link there. So today we're just going to do command line scripts because it's easier to look at that way. So those are considered installed. It's kind of like installing a mobile app. Okay. All right. So when you click on Create OAuth Client ID, that list of 5, you actually have to choose. Okay. So the list probably changes because I don't know if PlayStation 4 is still there or not, but you kind of pick one of those. So command line and server is not listed here. Web app is probably more browser side, so other is the correct one. So that's what I'm going to do in this case. I click Create. And then it's going to say, so here's your client ID and here's your secret. You should keep them secure. And what it will also do is, so this is not like an API key where you get one thing. You actually get these two things and a few more things. So now you can't really cut and paste these and drop them into your code anymore. So usually after you create it, I think it asks you, do you want to download these now? And so it will actually put these all into a JSON file that you can download. It's either called like client-secret.json or credentials.json or something like that. It'll prompt you to save it to your machine. It usually will have a pretty long number, which matches your project ID number, but you can rename it to something simpler, okay? So I think in all the code samples that I have, I just call it clients_secret.json, but you can call it credentials.json or something, okay? So, and if you accidentally hit cancel, you can always click on, I don't think it says download JSON anymore. It's not a button. I think there's like a little download icon somewhere to the right-hand side. So again, the UI has changed just a little bit. So it'll just show you, here's the client ID, here's the client secret, and then you can name that as well, and then save it. Okay, and then you can see them here. Okay, here's the API key that we created. Here's the client ID. Here's the OAuth client IDs. And by the way, you can make more than one of these because you may have different apps that are talking to this, and you sort of want to track where this request is coming from. So you can actually create different client IDs for the same project. Okay. All right, and then once you have the credentials and you start using our APIs, they are reachable globally from any kind of device as long as your users have opted your app in to getting them access to their data. Then they can get access to all your stuff. All right, so let's talk about programming languages that are supported. While this session features mostly Python and JavaScript code, we support all these other languages as well. So you can go and get the client libraries for Java, for C#, for Objective-C, Swift, PHP, Dart, Go, Ruby. Okay, so just go to this link here. Okay, and then you can get access to them. So again, we're doing Python and JavaScript. And to do those two, so for Python, you would just do pip install -U Google API Python client with hyphens in between. If you're running Python 3, then you would be doing pip3. But if your standard is Python 3 and you also want to get it for Python 2, then you do pip2. So those of you who are Python users, you know you can type pip2, pip3, depending on whether you want to do it in Python 2 or 3. Okay. And then if you want to read more information on the Python client library, you can just go to the same link as I showed you on the previous page, but just do /Python, and then there's a getting started link. On the JavaScript browser side, you don't really download anything because it's in the browser, right? So in your browser JavaScript code, you just basically do a sort of a script include. Okay, so you would include the gappy.client.request, so you can read more about that at that link there. And then for all of you Node developers, for the server side, use npm install Google APIs, and then you get access to that, and then the documentation is there. Okay, so those are the links that you would use to get the client libraries. Again, client side is a little bit different, just because you don't really download anything. But for Python and Node, that's how you do it. All right, so then which do you choose? So I told you about simple API keys versus OAuth 2 client IDs. Which one do you use and when? Okay, so it all depends on the type of API that you're using. For example, the simple APIs, which are API keys, API key only, those are used when you are accessing public data. It doesn't belong to a user. Like I'm searching through YouTube videos. All right, so if I'm searching through public YouTube videos, I don't need OAuth. If I am searching through public Google Plus posts, while it's still around, if you are sending a sentence to be analyzed by the Cloud Natural Language API, it's a sentence. It's not your private personal data. That's also public, so you use API keys there. So I'll show you an example of both of those, of searching for YouTube videos as well as for using Cloud Natural Language. So those examples are coming up. Okay, so in those cases, you use an API key. But for everything else, like I want to access my YouTube playlist, that's my playlist, that's personal data, or my Google Drive files, that's my personal data, it's user data. So anytime you have user data, you need OAuth because you have to ask your user to give your code permission to access their YouTube playlist or their Google Drive files. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand the difference between API key and OAuth now? Okay? Public versus private data. Okay? Good. So here's how you do simple API access from Python. So remember how I said you can cut and paste your API key here for now, but later on put it into something more secure. And the way it works is, the way you connect to a Google API is you give it the name of the API followed by the version number, okay? And there's a API, so the name of this module has now changed because API client sounds too generic, so they changed the name to Google API client. So in modern code, you would write from Google API client import discovery. And discovery has a function called build to build a service endpoint to that API. So in this example, I would be building a service endpoint to the YouTube version 3 API, and then I would pass in the API key to the developer key parameter. Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's talk about OAuth. So this is where the confusion comes in, right? So I'm going to try and break this down. The way it works is, here's the user, here's your app. Your app is going to try and request a token. Well, the user has to allow, again, it has to allow your code access to its software. So they have to log in, and they have to say, yes, give this app permission to access my stuff. And so they get back an authorization code. Then your application will exchange that code for what is called an access token. An access token is absolutely required to talk to an API and get OAuth authorized data. If you do not have an access token, there is no way you're going to get any personal data at all. Okay? So what happens is, when you exchange that authorization code for the token, you actually get two types of tokens back. One is the access token, which I just talked about. The other one is called a refresh token, because what happens is that access token expires in 1 hour. Okay? And when that access token expires, that's when you use the refresh token to go and ask for another access token to get another hour's access to this API and this user's data. Okay? So everybody understand the two types of tokens? The access token and the refresh token. Which is the one that you need to talk to an API? Okay, good. That's all you need to know. Pardon? The refresh, okay, good question. The question is, when does the refresh token expire? Okay, the refresh token never expires unless the user specifically revokes access to it, because like you opted in this app to get access to your data, but maybe you feel a little uncomfortable with it and you want to stop that. Okay, so then you just go to google.com/accounts, and then at some point it'll say like authorized applications. So you go into the authorized applications list, you'll see all the OAuth tokens you've granted, the refresh tokens you've granted. You can click revoke and just drop that thing, because once that refresh token is dead, then they can never get an access token again. Yeah, exactly. Now, there are situations. There are situations where Google security is overly paranoid and they may go and revoke access tokens. So I think there was one where, somebody is leaving a job, they quit the company, and even though we deleted their access from the web browser, their mobile app was still pulling in their email or something, even though they had left the company. So what they, or like if you change your password. So Google Security did something like I think maybe 2 years ago, where they said, if you change your password, we're gonna revoke all your refresh tokens or something like that. Okay? So sometimes it happens, but somebody else does the revoking of the refresh token. But normally the refresh token does not expire. So that's a good question. Okay, so valid access token is the only way to get third-party data access, and so this is how OAuth works in general, which is I'm going to create the OAuth 2 credentials in my developer console. I send these credentials, which is that authorization code, to get your access and refresh tokens. You use the access token to make authorized API calls, and then those access tokens do expire, so you use the refresh to get a new one, and so on. Again, that's all documented on that page there. Okay, everybody on board with OAuth now? So it should not be confusing anymore, right? Okay, so this is good because we can go straight into the code and you will understand everything. So this is great. And like I said, other companies do OAuth slightly differently, but they're probably not as complex as this, which is good. Once you get the hardest one down, everything else is easy, right? Okay, like I said, other APIs will be similar, but with some differences. In other words, they'll be easier. Okay. Okay, good thing this is not being recorded. All right, so let's look at some code. Let's talk about this, but let's not walk through the code yet, because I have another slide that actually, it makes more sense to look at it from that perspective. So I'll just talk about the concepts that are important to understand for OAuth stuff. You notice that the code here is a little bit more complex than, oh, do I really have to do this? Than this. The API key one is the easiest. So this is easy. Okay, OAuth is not necessarily easy. I knew it. Okay. So the one thing that is different is I know all of you have clicked on the OAuth thing where it asks, this app needs permission to do such and such, right? The such and such that's listed are called permission scopes. Okay, and now, guess what? We're on the other side of the fence. Now we're the developer asking for permissions. How many people think that sometimes when you install an app and run it the first time, it's asking for way more permissions than it needs? Like, why does it need access to my contacts information on my phone or whatever, right? This app is supposed to be, to help me find where my hotel is. Why does it need my contact information, right? So now we're on the other side. And so the best practice we like to say is, if you want your users to be comfortable installing your app, you should ask for the minimal amount of permissions in order for your app to function correctly. Don't just ask for everything. Okay, I know it's easier and it makes your code easier to run and there'll be less problems and stuff, but try and find the minimum scope. Okay, so a scope will look like a URL and you list them here, and basically there's an English version of that, and that's the thing that you see on the OAuth prompt where it says, this application needs access to view and manage your spreadsheets. It needs to view and manage your files on Google Drive. It needs to view and manage events on your Google Calendar. Those things in code will look like URLs and sit here, but there's an English equivalent, which is what shows up in the OAuth 2 prompt. So the permission scopes are what you're asking your user to opt into. So again, the best practice is to try and ask for the minimal amount of scopes that you need for your app to function so that people feel comfortable installing your app. Does that make sense? Okay, and so once you have those permission scopes, then we get down to the nitty-gritty, and then I'll walk through it in a moment in the next version. But I wanted to point out sort of like the other difference between API keys, that you still call discovery.build, you still pass in the API and the version number, but instead of developer key equals API key, you have to pass in signed credentials, okay, and then an HTTP client so that all of your requests are signed and encrypted over the wire, okay? So that's the big difference. And like I said, I'll walk through the middle section of the code in just a moment when we get to our first example. So again, here's how it works. The Google APIs have a request response workflow. The application makes the request to the API over HTTP. You have to make sure you have the correct credentials. Okay, and if you do have the correct credentials, like, an access token, then the API will respond. The lines are so faint, but there's a line. There's a line with an arrow that goes this way and a line with an arrow that goes from here to here. So I need to darken it a little bit more. It looks okay on screen, but I guess when it's on a projector, it's a little light. So anyway, so that's OAuth 2. Okay? And then the results are sent back to the application, so it's client-server flavored. Okay? All right, so now let's move to part 3 where we're going to talk about Google REST APIs, and I'm focused on the cloud ones because we have sort of like the most number of APIs of all products, but then I will also mention other Google APIs that are not part of Google Cloud towards the end. So Google Cloud is 2 different products. It is the Google Cloud Platform, which has a whole bunch of APIs, and then it's also G Suite, which has a bunch of APIs as well. Okay? Some people think that these 2 are the same, but they're not. I was telling the last session, they're clearly not because, look, the icons are different. Therefore, the products are not the same. Okay? G Suite, we're kind of missing an icon. We've been asking for an icon, but they're like, oh, we don't know how to do icons. So it's kind of weird. Anyway, so Google Cloud Platform has a whole bunch of APIs. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but it's up to you to kind of like memorize the hexagon and the name of the API. Okay? No, there's not enough. No, we need more. Okay, there. There's just not enough stuff in the Cloud Platform. But it's much easier on G Suite because you already know Gmail, Drive, Calendar, DocSheet slides, forms. All right. There's also AppScript, so I'm going to show you some AppScript code. So this is some of the repeat from the last session, and then AppMaker as well. All right, so let's start with Google Drive. You can ignore all this stuff. So every time I talk about an API, you'll see the icon and the name, and then I usually put some kind of like, what's the latest with this API? But it's not important for you to memorize or read or anything like that. It's just to show you that the team's continuing to innovate and coming out with new features as people ask. Why would you use the Drive API? Well, a couple of reasons. One is maybe you have a whole bunch of like zip files that you want to store safely in Drive, but isn't it kind of annoying where you really want to just look at files that are inside a zip file, but then you have to like uncompress it and look into it or have your operating system do that? Well, what you can do is you can write an app, which we actually have on GitHub, where you can actually just upload a bunch of zip files and this code will automatically, so this is a JavaScript app, it'll automatically unzip and throw all those compressed files into a folder, and then the name of the folder is actually the zip file name. So boom, I have all my zip files and I can access the files now. So that's like one example. Another example of what you can do with the Drive API is how many people, like when they get home from vacation, they dump their entire camera or their phone, mobile phone, into like a giant 2 terabyte hard drive at home, right? Are those things, they're safe, but are they organized? You're ever going to look at them again? Okay, that's crazy. You don't want that. So instead, what I think you can do is you can actually take something like this, which is sitting on your Drive folder. The Google Drive gives you access to file metadata. So you can actually look at the geolocation and the date and timestamps of your photos, and you can automate creating photo albums, okay? Or make collages or whatever, right? So I think that you can use, I haven't done this myself, I'm just trying to inspire you to do something useful with the Drive API, okay? I think you can do something like this because you can access that stuff. And that's one difference between Google Drive and Google Cloud Storage, because even though they're both storage in the cloud, cloud storage is all about blob storage and objects. You can put stuff in there, you can delete stuff, but you can't really look at the blob that's there. But Drive can, because it understands files and metadata, all right? So that's one difference. Okay, so now let's go and look at a code sample that will let you list the first 100 files and folders in your Google Drive. And if you totally forget everything I said, there's a video that you can watch where I just repeat the same thing, okay? You'll be tired of me after watching me for a while. Actually, I don't like listening to my own voice on video, so I always play myself at 1.5 to 2x speed, so at least slightly different. Okay, but now we have the same code as before. This time we're going to walk through the middle section. You notice we have a scope now. Remember how I said you should ask for the minimal scope that you need? Well, what are we trying to do in this app anyway? What we're trying to do is we're trying to look at the first 100 files and folders in your Drive, right? Do I need to look at your file content? No. Do I need to update your file on Drive? No. Am I adding new files to Drive? No. I don't need any of that stuff. So first of all, I don't need read-write access, so I want to ask for read-only access. And on top of that, I don't even want to read your object. I don't even want to read your file. I don't even want to look at it. I just want to get the name and the file type. So that's file metadata. So this is the minimal scope that I need for this. Instead of asking for Google API's auth/drive, which is everything, full access to your Google Drive, read and write. That's crazy, right? When you see that, somebody's asking for that permission, it's going to make you think twice before you click accept. You really have to want that functionality to click yes, right? But you really don't want to. Okay, so in this case, it's only going to say view your metadata on Google Drive. That's what the permission will be for your users when you run this, okay, which is much more benign than full read-write access. Okay, everybody understand that? All right, cool. By the way, I'm going to smile for me. I'm going to take a selfie with all of you. I have to prove to my boss I was here. And I gave this talk because she thinks I'm like flying around the country and like burning, costing Google lots of money. So I have to show that I've been here speaking to you guys. So. Yes. Laugh. Everybody look like you're learning something. Yay. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I had to work yesterday too. So I flew back from Albuquerque. And it was a work day for me as well, too. So I'm not working tomorrow or Tuesday, and I'm taking Wednesday off. And then I have to fly to Washington, D.C. on Thursday to do another conference or two. So anyway, so I'm pretty busy. But anyway, so that's the scope. Here's the application, okay? But let's walk through this middle code now so you understand what it is. By the way, this application that you see in the title, that's actually only 4 lines long. Everything else is like auth, okay? So, and by the way, this is Python. So you can imagine, like in Java, it's like this much code, all right? Actually, yeah, it used to be our Python code was pretty long too, but one of the things about Python is you should try and do things with a minimal number of lines of code. So I actually reduced our auth code from like 40 lines down to 6 or 7. Yeah, 5 actually. These 5 lines of code. That's all you need. All right, so couple things. One is when you download the JSON from your OAuth 2 credentials from your dev console, it'll either be called client secret something really long or credentials dot something really long. You can just shrink it to client secret.json, stick it somewhere safe. Okay. And then what happens is your access and your refresh tokens, you got to put those somewhere. So that I just randomly call it storage.json, but you can call it something else. I wouldn't call it access and refresh token.json. You're kind of telling people what this is, okay? It's not exactly a safe thing to do. In fact, you should probably put a dot in front of that so it's a hidden file at least or something, right? Okay, so anyway, oh, by the way, I like to write my code so it runs on Python 2 and 3 without any modifications. So I'm going to import the print function, so I'm going to pretend I'm in Python 3 and run this on Python 2. But if it's in Python 3, this line gets ignored. So this will run perfectly unmodified on 2 and 3. All right, so all the other imports are for auth. So here we go. So here's the scope of permission I'm asking for. I'm going to try and fetch my credentials from storage.json. So give me a handle to the storage token storage file. Try and get my credentials. If I do not have credentials or they have been revoked or expired, then I need to run through this OAuth flow, the prompt. Remember the OAuth prompt, right? So first I have to build the OAuth flow. So I'm going to build the OAuth flow from the client secret file that I downloaded that has my authorization credentials. I'm going to take that. I'm going to say what permissions I'm asking for. And so that builds that window, that little window that people opt in on. And then once I build that flow, I have to run that flow. So I call tools.runFlow and tell it where, if they say yes, I've got to put the access and refresh token somewhere. So I'm going to tell them I want to put it in my storage file. Okay, so by the time you get past here, either I would have gotten valid credentials already from storage that's already there, or I would have gotten the user to click accept and the Google servers will give me the access and refresh token. And by the way, if the user clicks decline or cancel at that step where the window shows up, then this run flow will throw an exception and the whole thing will stop right here. Okay, so once you pass this line, you have valid credentials. Now we can get to the application, which is I want to build a service endpoint to the Drive API version 3. And I'm going to take my access token and I'm going to authorize this HTTP client with it and make sure everything is signed, and I assign that as the HTTP object. Once I have that, the whole thing returns with me the Drive service file handle or the Drive service handle. Then I could say Google Drive API, call the files list method to list me all my files. By default, it's 100. I could actually say something like max results equals 25 if I only want 25 or 50 or 200 or whatever. But if you don't say how much you want, it'll give you 100 by default. And then I'm going to execute. So that's the API query right here. Then I'm going to execute the query. Okay, I don't need to save it as a variable because I'm going to execute it right away. And once I get the return values back, it comes back in dictionary format. So I need to go fetch files from it. And if it came back with no files, that would be kind of rare if you had no files in your drive folder, but that's possible. But just in case it didn't come back with anything, then you just give it an empty list. Okay, that gets assigned to files. And then for every file in my collection of files, print the name and its MIME type. Okay? And once you get this running for the first time, when you see your first 100 files just scrolling up on your screen, it's actually a joyous feeling. I mean, you go out and you just want to go get something to drink or smoke or something, right? It's actually a really good feeling. It's like, yes, I'm powerful. I cannot be stopped. Question? Okay, so interesting thing about folders. So the gentleman asked, how do you get folders instead of just files? It turns out that a folder is just a file. So it's a folder. Folder has a MIME type. So you can ask for a specific MIME type. So in addition to how many you want, you can also say something like only one specific types like the folder names. Okay, good question. I can't answer every question because there's a lot of APIs to know, but I'll do my best to try and answer your questions. Okay, if we have time at the end, I'll run through a couple of these examples for you. Okay, all right, let's look at the Sheets API because the Sheets API is the most, I would say, when you look at productivity software, I would say the spreadsheet is probably the most programmable out of all of them, right? Right? It's kind of cool to do that. So we have a new Sheets API now. It just came out in November 2016, so it's not even 2 years old yet, but it's really much better than any previous API that we've had in the past. The reason why is because if you used version 3 and older, The only things you could do with spreadsheets besides reading data out of a spreadsheet is creating new sheets within spreadsheets and adding data to sheets. That's it. That's all you could do. Boring. Okay? With the version 4 API, you could do all this other stuff that's bolded. Okay? In fact, the API team has a really they have a really high bar. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make it so that you can code through the API anything that you could do sitting in front of the user interface and doing. Okay, so that is their goal. All right, so that means you can do creating new spreadsheets, setting rows and rows, doing text and number formatting, doing cell validation, changing sizes, putting formulas, doing pivot tables, a lot more. Like anything, like I said, anything that you can do sitting in front of the user interface, you should be able to do through the API. So what's a use case? One use case is you have a lot of data in a database. Not exactly the most easy to visualize, especially for managers. You don't want your manager to have to do select something from table, right? You want to put it in a spreadsheet and send it to them because it's easier for managers to look at them. So that's one reason why you would use the API, to extract data from a database, throw the relevant data into into a spreadsheet, and then you can do all kinds of cool stuff that a database can't do, such as building charts and other visualizations. Okay? And if you want to get started using the Sheets API, we have this really cool Node code lab where you can step-by-step build a customized reporting tool for like a fictitious toy manufacturing company and managing toy orders. All right, so it's a pretty cool code lab. All right, written by my tech lead a couple years ago. So that's one reason. So so I created another video that leverages that database for the toy orders. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the database that my manager made, or my TL made for the code lab, and I'm going to pull out all the toy order data from that database. It's a SQLite database, so it's pretty easy. So here are the column names. And then what I do is I connect to the SQLite database. I do select star from all orders. So basically, I'm fetching all the orders, and then I'm throwing them into rows. And then I insert all the field names as the very first row, so that when I write my spreadsheet, I have names at the top in row 1. Okay? And so then what I do is I create a brand new spreadsheet called customer orders. Okay? So the data is just the spreadsheet metadata, like the file name. I pass that in, and I say, give me the spreadsheet ID back. And then I execute the query. And by the way, what you don't see is all this code that we looked at a couple slides ago. This code here for Drive, I'm going to cut and paste this. The only thing that changes is now I'm going to have a spreadsheet scope. So I'll probably do like spreadsheets.read-only or whatever. Okay, so every API in the documentation, they'll tell you all the scopes that are available to use. And they're not always the same. Okay, so you have to look at the documentation for each API to figure out what is the correct scope for the use case that you want. Yeah, question? Oh, wait, this person was first, so hold on. Go ahead. Yeah? So I don't know how the Facebook API works. You'll have to look at their developer documentation to find out how to use it. So their OAuth is probably going to be different. But yeah, when you do API calls, I'm not sure whether or not they make you do raw HTTP or whether or not they'll give you a method like this. So it depends on who the vendor is. What'd you say about events? Oh, you mean the search engine? The search engine does not have an API, so yeah. People end up scraping the website, so it's not a great solution. But no, there isn't one at this time. So I know that's not the answer you're looking for. But anyway, how about you, sir? What's your question? Yeah, so that basically takes this and inserts that into this array as the 0th element, so it comes before all of the data. Yeah, that's the table header. Because the data in this spreadsheet does not include the names. It just has the raw data. So I had to manually add it, basically. Yeah, if your database has it in first row, then you don't have to do this. Yeah. Can you get what? You can probably, yeah, you'll have to write some Python code to take these as the keys, and then those are the values. Yeah, you just have to write code to make that happen. Okay. In this case, so anyway, so we have like sheets equals discovery.build sheets comma v4 http blah blah blah. Okay. And so I have then, okay, so then I do this, create the spreadsheet, get the ID back, so save the ID. Then I'm going to go spreadsheet values update, give the ID of the sheet, starting storage in cell A1, all these rows, and then write them raw directly to the spreadsheet. The other one besides raw is user entered. So for example, if your spreadsheet was already pre-formatted with like, bold or italics or whatever, you can change this from raw to user underscored entered, and that would put the data in as if you were a user typing it in from the user interface, versus just throw the data straight into the spreadsheet. This is faster, as you can imagine. Okay, cool. And there's a video behind this, so if you want to see this, watch the video. And then the other one is, let's format the header row. Let's make it frozen. You drag it down so that if you scroll beyond, it stays there, and then make them all bold. Okay, so the frozen row is a spreadsheet property, so I'm going to update sheet properties and say the frozen rows are 1. And then the other command is repeat cell. So now when you bold each, it's a cell operation. Okay, versus frozen rows, an entire sheet operation. So that's why this command is different. So repeat cell command of the first row, I want to set the user enter format.text format.bold flag to true. So now I have 2 commands inside my requests bucket, and then I send both requests as a batch to the API, to pass in the spreadsheet ID, and this time I don't care about what fields come back, I just want it done, and then I execute it. Okay, and then there's a video behind that one. Okay, I'm going to slowly start speeding up, because we're running short on time. Yeah, running short on time. All right, Google Slides API. So Slides API, why would you want to use the Slides API? Okay, so let's say that we were smart enough to use a Sheets API. We had data in a database, not too visible or visual. We migrate that into a sheet. We build a chart from it. Now it's more visual. Now to make it even more presentable, I want to put that into a slide deck. So I have something in a spreadsheet. I have something in a spreadsheet. I have the data from the database, and now I made a chart out of it. I can actually use the Slides API to extract that data from a spreadsheet and build a slide deck out of it. So that's one use case. Another use case is, let's say you're in sales and you are having to talk to like 6 different clients, but you want to use the same slide deck. So you make a template slide deck, put a bunch of variable names in for like customer name and location and maybe corporate logo or something for them. So you create a master template, and then what you can do is you can use the Slides API to auto-generate 6 slide decks unique for each customer, filling in the variable names and their corporate logo and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and then another cool tool, if you want to like see a good example of how to use the Slides API, is this another Node app, where my colleague another colleague wrote a Markdown. If you write an entire slide deck in Markdown, you can generate Google Slides out of it. So it's pretty cool, including images and videos and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. All right, so let's do this example. So let's say I made a template deck. I want to fill in some variables. All right, so I'm going to go through. I'm going to find everything that says, my variable is curly title, and then I'm just going to replace it with a company name or hello world, and then maybe I have another shape that has an image that says logo, and I want to replace it with a corporate logo or something like that. So then I just say, these are my 2 commands. Search and replace these variable names for the customer name, and then search and replace all shapes with this image of their customer logo, give it the URL, and then I just do slides equals discovery.build slides API version 1 equals blah, 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 blah. And then down here, I can do slides presentation batch update, so send all these requests over, give the presentation deck ID, and then I don't care about return values, and then execute that. And then there's a video on this one as well. Okay, so that's a Slides API. How about the Gmail API? So Gmail API is to make up for the fact that SMTP and IMAP can't do everything. Those things only understand messages. They don't understand threads. They don't understand labels. They don't understand email signatures. They don't understand vacation responders, none of that stuff. So that's why the Gmail API exists. Okay? So here's a simple application where you want to, let's say I have one of my Gmail addresses is used to be on mailing lists. I only want to look at threads that are busy, like there's at least 10 replies on this email thread. If it's not busy, I don't really care. all right? So what I do is I'm going to go ask for all the threads. Oh, wait, sorry. Gmail equals discovery.build, Gmail API v1, blah, blah, blah. And then I can do Gmail users, threads, list of the user ID, which is me. I want all the threads, and then for every thread, I'm going to get the thread ID, and then I'm going to get all the messages and find out how many messages do I have. Do I not have any messages in this thread? Because it's possible. You can actually delete every message in a thread, but normally people don't do that. But this if statement is an edge case, basically. So the main idea is once I got the thread, I want to find out how many messages it has. So I'm going to grab all the headers, okay? And then what I do down here is if the number of messages in this thread is more than 10, then I'm going to look at the payload and dig around for the subject line. If I find the subject line and it's not blank, then I'm going to print how many messages are in this thread and what the subject line is. Okay? So that's an example of using a Gmail API, and of course there's a video on it. I have videos for almost every example that I do. All right, calendar API. So why would you use a calendar API? I don't have a slide on that. Yeah, I don't have a slide on it. So the main reason why you would use a calendar API is, let's say you're writing the next generation travel booking app, okay? And you help people book their next travel, whether it's a plane or hotel or whatever. But the thing is, after they've done the booking and then they get your email confirmation, now they have to go and pick out the dates and the addresses and manually cut and paste them into their Google Calendar. Why can't you do that for them, right? You can make it easier for them. Right? So that's why you would use a calendar API, is to manage their events. So here's an example where I'm going to create dinner with friends. All right, so it's dinner time, start and end time. Here are my friends I'm going to invite to dinner. And then I just do gcal equals Google Calendar API version 3, blah, blah, blah. And then gcal events insert into my primary calendar this event, and then I want to send notifications to my friends that they've been invited to dinner. I don't care about return values, execute, and boom, you're done. Okay, so the video on creating events is here, and then I have a sequel to it, which is how do you modify an event that already exists, and also how do you make events recurring? Because maybe you guys had such a great time at dinner, maybe you want to do this once a quarter or something like that. Okay, so that's that. Google Docs API just launched 2 months ago, or no, I wouldn't say it launched. It launched it to early access program. So if you want to sign up for early access to the Docs API, it's brand new. We never had one before. Then just go to that link there, and then you can sign up to be an early access partner. But you have to have a pretty good use case, because like so many people are applying right now. Okay, but the main idea is, let's say I want to do a mail merge. All right, so I want to replace all, it's kind of like the Slides API, all versions of like curly title inside my Google Doc. I want to put hello world in it. So I just do docs equals discovery.build documents version 1 API, and then batch update, send the request over, and then pass in the file ID. I don't want anything returned, and then just execute that. So it's a pretty basic example. You can't, like I said, you can't do this yet until you're in the early access program. So if you have a good use case and you get access to the code, this sample and a bunch of more serious examples that I've done, I have like a whole one that does a letter mail merge. Okay? So let's skip and talk about Google Cloud. So we did G Suite all this time, but Google Cloud Platform APIs are also valid. So here's BigQuery. So BigQuery is same thing. So in this case, I'm going to have BigQuery equals discovery.build BigQuery version 2 API, and then I can issue this command which tells me the top 10 most common words in Shakespeare. Okay, so I give it the query, and then the BigQuery API does require you to pass in the project ID, so you have to do that. But you pass in the query, you execute it, and then you can like loop through and print all the results and the headers as well as the data, so it looks something like this. So these are the top 10 most common words in all of Shakespeare. It'd be a bummer to do this by hand, right? Okay, you might be off by a couple, but it's easy to let BigQuery do this. So BigQuery, I don't know if you know, but if you're not familiar, BigQuery is a large-scale data analysis tool that lets you analyze multiple terabytes of data in just seconds instead of hours or days or whatever. So it's very powerful. And then Shakespeare is just one example of the public data sets we make available for free for you to experiment with. But there's a whole bunch of stuff like, there's like Wikipedia check-ins. There's like updates to Hacker News. There's weather station data. There's the Health and Human Services neonatal database, so you can sort of like, you can issue a very specific query like, what was the effect of smoking on birth weight for babies born to mothers between 1957 and 1965? You can actually ask for a very specific query like that and get answers in seconds, okay, so it's pretty cool. So that's BigQuery. Cloud Natural Language is another API I want to show you. So this is where you can extract out sentiment analysis. Like what are people feeling, positive or negative about something? or you can also extract information about people, places, events, and things. And you can also do content classification. So in this demo I'm going to show you now, we're going to do sentiment analysis and content classification. Okay? So here's an example. Oh, by the way, here's our first simple API key example, because this is public data. This is not private. So I just need to have discovery.build API key. Okay, so this is plain text. Okay, so I'm going to create an endpoint to the natural language API. Then I'm going to say, please analyze the sentiment. Tell me if it's positive or negative, given the score, and then how strong that feeling is. That's magnitude. And then classify the categories that you think this piece, this text appears in. Okay, and give me the confidence level. So here are the results. So here's the text. So the sentiment is positive, probably because of the word love. Okay, because the feeling is very strong. Okay, if this was a negative number, they would be negative sentiment. Okay, and then categorizations, this is 76% likely to be internet and telecom related, 64% related to computers and electronics, and then 56% likely it's news. Okay, so it's a pretty cool API to use. So that's simple API key, no OAuth there. So YouTube is not cloud, okay, but I want to show you an example of that because doing a search for videos is also simple API key example. So I'm going to do YouTube equals discovery.build YouTube API version 3, and now API key again. Really easy, no OAuth. I'm going to search for Python, but every time I search YouTube for Python, I get videos with snakes. I don't know why. So I actually have to subtract snakes out of the query to get programming videos. It's kind of crazy, right? And then you run this and you get a whole bunch of stuff, okay? And by the way, another question people ask is, can I use more than one API in the same app? The answer is yes. So for the example where I'm building the multiple slide decks for customers, I need the Drive API because I'm going to copy my slide template. Then I'm going to use the Sheets API because all my customer information is in the Google Sheet. Then I'm going to use the Slides API to create the new slide deck. So I have 3 different scopes here in an array. Okay, my OAuth code is exactly the same. I create an HTTP variable because I only want one HTTP client, and then I can reuse that for all 3 API endpoints. Okay, so that's the last thing I want to say. Running out of time, so I'm going to scroll through the other 50 slides really fast right now. Okay, so serverless. So some of you already came to the serverless talk, so that's why I can scroll through this really fast. App Engine is really cool. Node and Python are supported. Here's your hello world for doing an app. So the main idea behind App Engine is that we host your apps for you. You don't have to spin up VMs or operating systems or anything like that. So Flask app, hello world, pretty easy. Deploy, and then you're done. Oh yeah, there's the deploy. Okay, and then Cloud Functions is the other cool serverless platform we have in cloud. So that's where you can just upload functions and make it available on the internet. Okay, so here's hello world. Then I run this command to deploy it, and then I can access it from an API or from the browser, which I'll show you in a moment, curl command or whatever. So I have functions that are now online. Oops, no demo. AppScript is another thing I did in the last session. This is also serverless. So I have a spreadsheet. So remember how we had to like get OAuth from a spreadsheet, then I have to store data, I have to get a service endpoint, I have to create requests, and then I have to batch update the request. Well, in AppScript, you don't have to do that. You can just say spreadsheet, give me access to the current sheet, give me cell A1, and then put hello world into it, and then boom, you have that. Okay, pretty easy. So using AppScript is not like using APIs. It's much easier. And then all the OAuth code is written for you automatically. So that's why you didn't see it in that code at all. This is a 1-line JavaScript code, and the OAuth code is written for you on your behalf. You use this when you can operate within its constrained environment. And if you want to use like other languages like Java or whatever, then use the REST APIs. Okay, so this is kind of constrained to kind of G Suite and Google stuff. Even though you can use JDBC to talk to external databases with this, you can also use URL fetch to talk to external, but Google is operating the code for you. Okay, so there's a video for this. Here's the other example, which is more useful, where I have an address that's in a spreadsheet. I can actually say, hey, give me the active sheet, pull out the address in cell A2, store an address. Now talk to Google Maps, create me a new map, put a pin on that address, and then email that map to my friends so they can come join me at the Google New York office for lunch. Okay, so this is a 4-line JavaScript code that touches Google Sheets, Google Maps, and Gmail. There's no OAuth code at all, and it's done. All right, so video on this one as well. The main reason for that is to show that now you can take that and build something real with it, like I want to visit all my customers in New York, and because I created those 6 slide decks that I made for them, right? Or my 6 customers in New York. Or I have a user group meeting or a book club that meets once a month at a different location. I want to send them a map to where they need to go, or whatever, right? So those things help you. It's to inspire you to build something useful, okay? And then AppScript powers add-ons and other integrations like Hangouts Chat and Gmail, okay? But anytime you hear the word add-ons, that's almost always going to be AppScript code. It allows you to take docs, sheets, slides, forms, and Gmail and Hangouts Chat and actually add on to extend them with your own functionality instead of just taking what Google gives you, okay? So here's an example of generating slides from images where I have 4 images that are online. I want to build a slide deck from it. Okay, so I have 4 images. Here are the links to them. I'm going to put a title and subtitle on the first slide that I get, and then I'm going to loop through every image, and then for every image, I'm going to add a new blank slide at the end of my slide deck and insert the image. Okay, and that's it. You have an instant slide deck, and there's a video for that. And then the Gmail add-ons. This one's interesting because this use case, I should have used this slide in my last talk. Okay, because this one is the full example where if you're traveling and you want to do expense reports, can't I do them without leaving Gmail? Because I'm going to get the receipts in my Gmail, but now I have to cut and paste everything into my whatever tool or spreadsheet so I can submit to get my expenses paid off. But if you write in Gmail add-on, if you look at this very carefully, you can see that I'm kind of in Gmail, right? I'm looking at this receipt. Can't I do my expense reports in one spot without leaving the tool? The answer is yes, because on the right-hand side, you see a bunch of little icons. Those are Gmail add-ons. If you click, I wrote my summer intern wrote this one, which is the receipt one. So if you click on the one that looks like a receipt, because it's kind of jagged edges, it'll actually use a regex and extract the date, the amount, and the vendor from the receipt, and then you just punch in a spreadsheet URL, you click submit. By the way, this is on the web. The cool thing about Gmail add-ons is that it's write once, run anywhere. It'll actually look similar on mobile. So on mobile, the icons are on the bottom. So when you click on the add-on, it'll actually scroll up and show you the form, which is identical to that one. And then once you submit that, then once you click submit, it'll say logged expense successfully, and then boom, you're going to have this pretty spreadsheet that you can save as PDF or export as Excel and send to your accounts payable team to give it to you. But guess what? You processed everything while you're in Gmail. You didn't have to cut and paste between apps. So Gmail add-ons are pretty cool in that way. The code, this is just part of the code. It's pretty long and complicated. Watch the video. In there, we have a link to the GitHub repo for my summer interns project where this whole thing works. It's pretty awesome. And he's also in the video with me too, so it's kind of cute. Anyway, so that's a Gmail add-on. And then for writing bots for Hangouts Chat, so if you're a G Suite customer, one of the things that makes the new Hangouts different from the existing Hangouts is that you can write bots for it. So for example, I can write a bot to ask people, hey, who wants to go to lunch today? Oops, who wants to go to lunch today? And they can click +1 or -1. Okay, and it's very simple AppScript code. Okay, you just write the code. Here it is. You have to build this UI though, so the UI code looks something like this. So it's just JSON markup. You put it together and people can use it. Here's a video for that, so you can build your first Hangouts chatbot if you're a user. If you're a G Suite customer, your company admins have to enable you to use the new Hangouts. The new Hangouts is not available to normal Gmail users at this time. So we're working on it, but it's easier when you have paying customers to say we want to make this available to you than free for everybody. Okay. All right. So wrapping up. So Hangouts chat. I just talked about how to do it in AppScript, but guess what? There's an API behind it. So if you are interested in writing bots, this is all the REST APIs I showed you was this technique, which you saw. Okay, but bots is slightly different because requests come from users in chat rooms. And then Hangouts chat gets a message. Hangouts chat sends your bot in the cloud somewhere, the request. You do the request. You return the string back to Hangouts chat, and then it renders that in the chat room for people to see. So a bot architecture is like 3-tiered, so it's a little bit different from a standard REST API. But here's a Flask bot where it's just, you type in something to the bot, it just returns, hi, what your username is, and you sent this message. So it's kind of like an echo bot. It's pretty basic. So this is the Flask version. Here's the Node version, because I want to be, Node JavaScript friendly. This is Python and JavaScript, so the Node thing is exactly the same. The one that's a little bit different here is that instead of using regular Google Cloud Functions, I'm using Cloud Functions for Firebase. So assuming that I have a mobile app, okay, and I'm issuing a request, and I want to get tied to my Firebase data or something like that. So it's still Node, okay? But that's the equivalent code, EchoBot. And then you can also do asynchronous messages like, what if you want the bot to send you a message when your server goes down? Okay, that's not related to a request. And in this case, you actually have to talk to the REST API. All right, you have to go through OAuth because your bot is initiating the message to Hangouts chat. You're talking to Google, so you need to have OAuth. All right? And since you've already looked at the code, the only difference now is that instead of the user being there, I have to use a service account because a bot will never be a human user. So you're never going to use the normal OAuth flow. You have to use a service account, which is computer to computer. So you still download it from the developer console. Instead of creating OAuth to client, you're going to create the service account OAuth client. Okay, and then it's going to give you the entire JSON file to download again. So instead of discovery, well, discovery.build is here, but you would actually create your credentials from the JSON key file that was generated along with the scopes, which is talking to bots. Then discovery.build, and you have access to the chat room, and now I can just post this message to the chat room by, the room has to have an ID, or the direct message has to have an ID. So you have to post to that ID, send the message, and then execute. So now you can send messages out of band to whoever's in the chat room, like your admins, like I said, to manage. Or maybe if it's not your server going down, maybe it's a new customer has come in, right, or something like that. So it's not just tied to those specific use cases. And then, because it's just posting, you don't even have to use the API. You can actually just use incoming webhooks, where you can generate a big, long authentication string, and then you can just post it directly with requests or with curl. You don't even need to use the API to do incoming webhooks. But this is not a bot. This is basically like monitoring code that has to send a message into a chat room. Bots use the API, but non-bots use incoming webhooks to send messages into a chat room. Okay? And to create an incoming webhook, you just go to the room, and there's a way you can configure your own webhooks. And then you get this long, giant URL that has OAuth built into it automatically, and you just cut and paste and use that. Okay? And incoming webhooks work something like this. And then I don't have time for thread keys. Ask me later if you're interested. And OK, so wrapping up, other Google APIs that are not cloud. So Firebase also uses Python and JavaScript. Actions on Google, so if you want to build apps that use Assistant and do voice command stuff, that also uses Python and JavaScript. You already saw YouTube, but I only showed you the data API. There's also analytics and a live streaming API as well. And then we also have, there's a website for their APIs, and then Google Maps also has lots of APIs, maps, routes, and places APIs. Each one of these groupings has their own set of APIs. Okay? And then there's a link for that. And that's it. So to learn more stuff to get started, here's some code labs for Cloud Platform. Here's some information on G Suite. To read more, the documentation for G Suite starts here. The documentation for Cloud Platform starts here. We have a bunch of blogs. We have a bunch of Twitters. All right, so take a picture. But also put the slide deck in the website for the page. And then more references. Let's see. So Developers Console, there's the cloud one. Client libraries for Python. Oh, by the way, if you're doing Django or App Engine, there's special versions of the client library. Node is pretty easy. I have some developer videos. Most of them are, I would say, are G Suite flavored, but I do have some cloud ones in this older Launchpad Online series. And then specifically relevant videos to today's talk is a review of how to get a project going in the developer console. Let's talk about the OAuth code again. And then here's the Drive API one. And the same link showed up on the Drive API page too. Okay, and just make money fast, become successful, and then I'll be happy. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much.